Welcome everyone. We're very fortunate today to have our speaker as Nicki there. Say hello, Nicki. Wave.
Hi everyone.
Yeah, so Nicki's got a brilliant subject to speak on. She's a recognised expert in the area. We think it's really important for both employers and employees. So I'll shortly be handing over to Nicki to introduce herself. But anyone who's not familiar with the Kickstart scheme, who wants more information, the Kickstart scheme, which we think applications are shortly going to close for this, so you need to be quick, is a bounce back kind of benefit for businesses to help them grow, bounce back, whatever it is they need to do. And it's a brilliant opportunity for young people to get their foot on the careers ladder, which hopefully Kathy can attest to. So I'll pass over to you then, Nicki, to introduce yourself and explain the brilliant subject that you're going to speak for us on.
Thank you, Mark. I'm just going to share my screen, so if you just, I can't, I'll just allow you to sort that out for me.
Yeah.
So I'm Nicki Eyre from Conduct Change, and our work is all about looking at behaviours in business. And that obviously includes looking at the poor behaviours, which is what we're going to talk about today, which is workplace bullying. So can everybody see the screen okay? Brilliant, okay. So bullying awareness is what we're talking about today, not just about how to recognise it, but actually how to prevent it. That's what's going to be really important. So we will be covering the difference between bullying, cyberbullying, harassment and victimisation. I say harassment, other people say harassment. It's entirely up to you. Looking at the different behaviours that can lead to bullying, what the mental health implications are, what you can do, and also how employers can actually help prevent it. So that's a really important part of it there as well. Bullying. When we first think about bullying, we ask a lot of people, and feel free to pop this in the chat, what sort of image normally comes up for you? Because quite often, we don't think about it being in the workplace. So verbal, yeah, that's one of the types. Aggressive, yeah. What we quite often think about is it being in the school, the playground. We don't necessarily assume that it's gone through. Email, yeah, definitely. We'll be picking that up in cyberbullying later. But when we talk about workplace bullying, it's actually not a new problem. So there's been research going on into this for at least 25 years. And actually, back in 2015, when ACAS, which is the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, they give a lot of advice to employers. When they actually put their last figures out in 2015, they were receiving around 20,000 calls relating to bullying and harassment each year. And obviously that's only one place where you can actually go to try and get advice. But essentially at that point in time, I thought that it was probably losing 18 million working days each year as a result of this kind of behaviour. But there is a global shift towards change. There's all sorts of different initiatives and pressures coming out at the moment, which are such as the ISO 45003, which is about psychological safety in the workplace and managing the psychosocial risks. The International Labour Organization, they're calling worldwide for people to really manage violence in the workplace and prevent that. And obviously sustainable development goals are all about actually the working environment as well, in terms of equality and diversity, mental health, all of those kind of things actually fit within this agenda as well. What we're finding though is that people are starting to speak up as well. And some of those are incredibly powerful campaigns into the outside world, using social media, using the press to actually really get their voice across. And even as individuals, people are now reporting on websites like Glassdoor about their workplace experience. And if they feel bullied at work, they put it on there. And they're also rating how the chief executive is seen in that organisation. So it's really becoming an incredibly powerful voice. And now we're starting to see groups in organisations coming together and going to the press because they're not being heard within their organisations. So it can have a huge impact on the reputation of an organisation. And it's, you know, we put a couple up there. There was Apple, there was Brewdog, but actually it covers just about every sector, not over in the UK, but across the world. So the finance sector, Institute of Directors is the IOD, NHS. And over in France, they actually had a case where they went in and they were trying to do a redundancy program, but they didn't want to actually pay people to make them redundant. So they just put in an approach where basically they would either take all the work away from people and leave them not knowing what was happening, or they would overload them until they just wanted to leave the company. As a result, there were a large number of suicides, somewhere in the region of 40, and the 3 top bosses of that organisation were given jail sentences. But look at those dates. It took 10 years for that to go through. So it's a huge problem. It is a huge problem. And it's one that businesses find quite hard to tackle because it's where do we start? But we have to start somewhere. And the Me Too campaigns, Black Lives Matter, things like that have really kind of brought some of the harassment to the front. And in the latest research on the CIPD, which was January 2020, they discovered, they asked these questions separately. So 4% of the people that they conducted the survey with had been sexually harassed in the workplace. 8% had experienced other forms, and we'll talk about what those are shortly. But 15% experienced bullying, which means we've basically got over a quarter of the workforce experiencing bullying or harassment. And bullying is actually a bigger problem than all of the harassment put together, which I don't think is really recognised or picked up in the press. People don't like to speak up. Cyberbullying is on the increase as well. And actually there's a real problem in terms of line managers not knowing how to deal with these issues as well. So, workplace bullying. What is the definition of bullying? If you want to go to the chat again, what do you think the definition of workplace bullying is? And I'm sure that there will be slight variations, but quite a common theme. So I'll just give you a minute because I can see people typing. Controlling behaviours, threats, abuse. So yeah, those are a lot of the behaviours that come up, but how do we actually define bullying overall? Anyone got any ideas? Creating a culture of fear, sabotaging, condescending. Yeah, one of the things that's really difficult to do is define bullying. And that's why what tends to happen is that we end up coming up with a list of behaviours. And actually, there isn't one definition of bullying. And the most commonly used definition is by ACAS again. And they've actually changed it slightly on their website in the last few years, last few months actually. So bullying is behaviour from a personal group that's unwanted. And that word unwanted is really key there. And they talk about how it makes you feel. And I'm not quite sure why intimidated, degraded, humiliated and offended are in inverted commas, because that's just the way it's written on their website. So I've just taken it straight from there. But originally what they actually said was bullying may be characterised as offensive, intimidating, malicious or insulting behaviour, an abuse or misuse of power through means that undermine, humiliate, denigrate or injure the recipient. Now that definition used to be on the ACAS website, and they've changed it because I think they've just tried to make it more accessible, but that definition actually came from a legal case. So that was actually put together by a judge. And what's really important in there is that abuse of power. So within bullying, there's generally a power differential. And I think what's really important is that we don't forget that that doesn't necessarily mean that it's your boss, because those power differences can come from knowledge, they can come from information, they can come from excluding somebody from a group. It can come from all sorts of different directions. It can also come from customers. There's a lot in the news at the moment about frontline staff in retail, frontline staff in the NHS, and having to protect those people. And also it could be a supplier or somebody where one business has contracted with another, so it can be between businesses. It's quite a huge issue in the workplace. So cyberbullying is obviously really, really important now as well. It's any form of bullying, harassment or victimisation online. So particularly with, we generally tend to think about cyberbullying as social media, just actually going online and everything that we see, and very much tend again to associate it with the younger generation. But actually it can be through email, we've already had mentioned earlier. It can be through social media, obviously WhatsApp groups and things like that are much more widely used now. But now we've got a lot more home working, and we've got remote working using things like Zoom and Teams. Then essentially we can see behaviours happening in that way. And it can even be right down to the level of surveillance, where actually people are being micromanaged, they're not being trusted, they're having to leave their cameras on all the time. There's software going onto their computers to track how much time they're spending at their desk, how long they're away from the desk for, when the keyboard was last touched, things like that. So it really is a growing area, and I think a lot of people don't understand that if they're working from home and all of the interaction is now online and they feel bullied, that is cyberbullying. So a really, really big area. The next one to look at is really how we define harassment. So anybody got any ideas about what is different about harassment compared to the bullying definition? What makes it different? I can't see if anybody's typing or not yet, so I'm just going to wait and see. The pattern is absolutely the same for bullying and for harassment, but actually what makes harassment different is that it's related to a protected characteristic. So do we know what protected characteristics are? This is absolutely sits within the Equality Act. It has a different legal status. We have no legal definition of bullying, but this is a legal definition. So when we're talking about harassment and the protected characteristics, there are 9 of them, and you will recognise them when we see them. So we've got all sorts of different ones here, and as I just talked through the list, which one do you think is the most common form of harassment found in the workplace? So we've got age, race, religion or belief, sex, pregnancy and maternity, which most people don't realise, sexual orientation, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, and disability. So we've got a choice. We've got 2 that have come forward. So, oh, right, we're on 3. So sex, race and age. Now, actually, sexual harassment is the most common. And interestingly, age is actually the second most common. And we tend to kind of forget about age, but it is definitely there. And again, race is very high up there, Olivia. Thank you. Thank you for joining in there. So what's victimisation then? All of these different phrases. Well, basically, if you stand up for somebody else or you support a complaint to do with a protected characteristic, or somebody thinks that you did, so you don't even have to have done anything, and you get treated differently as a result of that, then that is victimisation. So those are some of the key terms that we need to be aware of. But when I asked you the definition earlier, we actually started getting a list of some of the different behaviours. So if we think about the whole spectrum of behaviours, there's a huge wide spectrum of different behaviours that people can exhibit. And what's really important is that we recognise that some of those is just rudeness, incivilities, misunderstandings that can lead to people thinking, oh, that's not a good behaviour, right up to the other end of it, which is very much about a repeated pattern of behaviour, which also is going to increase the risk of psychiatric injury. So it's a huge extreme of behaviours. And it's worth picking up here the fact that actually anyone can be bullied, but also anyone can be a bully. So on the chat, have you ever rolled your eyes at anybody when they've said something? Yeah. Yes. Yes. So easy to do, isn't it? And yet for some people, imagine, probably all the time, I love it, Mark. Yeah, if people actually are on the receiving end of that, and every time they speak, somebody rolls their eyes, oh, you know, it's them speaking again, or what a load of rubbish. You know, there's all sorts of interpretation that can be made of that. And yet it's one of those things that we do without realising we're doing it. And a lot of that is around awareness. I just want to pick up here as well, some of the reasons why perhaps somebody might actually show bullying behaviours. So what do you think might cause somebody to be a bully? And they might not realise it. So I'm going to let you jump on chat with that one. So they may have been a target of bullying themselves previously, and actually they've learnt that behaviour. Personal insecurities, absolutely, low self-esteem. Okay, Mark, so being under pressure, so when people are under pressure to perhaps hit sales targets or to really hit their goals and their objectives, then they may push down on the people below them because of they're getting pressure from above and they push that downwards. And so when they're under pressure, they take it out on other people. Sense of humour, different sorts of banter, what is quite often referred to as a bullying behaviour. Banter, if it's entered into equally and on a level playing field, then absolutely that's banter. But if somebody is not willingly engaging, but they're perhaps laughing because they feel like they have to be part of the group, then actually that is when it turns into bullying behaviour. Different generations not understanding each other, yeah, just different expectations within there can really, that poor communication, not knowing how to handle those situations, not understanding how to manage conflict, people being promoted without actually being given any support into that leadership role. And it could be that actually they've come into an organisation where there are poor behaviours, and what they've seen is they've observed that if they exhibit those behaviours themselves, then they will fit in, they will belong, and therefore they'll be promoted, they'll be rewarded for behaving in that way. And so it's very hard to break that down. But it could also be that there are things like, for example, if they've grown up in an environment where sexism and racism and things like that are used on a daily basis, and they perceive that to be the norm, and they haven't been educated in any other way, then they will not actually recognise the problem with their behaviour. And they might not actually be able to see their own behaviour as a problem. Yeah, we've got some things like talking about different expectations. So a workaholic expecting that of their team, and actually we'll pick that up as we go into the behaviours and the difference between the personal behaviours and workplace behaviours. So yeah, there can be all sorts of different reasons for people to actually show bullying behaviours, and a lot of it can be prevented. A huge amount of it can be prevented. So bullying behaviours, we've started picking some of these up. And what I want to do is start with looking at some of the personal behaviours, And we can split those between kind of physical, verbal, and psychological. So physical, you know, if I say physical to you, we've already talked about the eye rolling. And actually, that's a really small physical movement, and yet it is something that could be a personal behaviour that could be construed as bullying. It can be high levels of aggression, you know, actually grabbing hold of people or pushing them around. But it can also be those very slight movements of just turning away from people or blocking them when they try to join a conversation. Or just walking away from them when they're trying to talk to them. It can be things like that as well. So what about verbal? What sort of verbal behaviours would we see? The obvious one is shouting and screaming at somebody when it's very, very overt. You see it, you can hear it, people are likely to witness it. But it also can be gossiping about people. It can be whispering. It can be, again, the turning away and not including people in a conversation. So there's all sorts of different things there. The type of language that you're using as well. Yeah, absolutely. So very much that controlling, coercive language, which leads us into the psychological as well. So you may have heard of a term called gaslighting. And that actually is named after a film in the 1940s. And in that, essentially, a husband convinced his wife that she was making things up, even though they were real. So she didn't know what to believe, what was real and what wasn't. And you may get that with people who are saying, I didn't say that, or no, you're wrong about that, or why have you done that again? Told you not to do that, when you are sure that you've been told the exact opposite. So there's all sorts of that drip that really can be incredibly damaging. But the other area that people don't really think about is actually the work-related behaviours, and these actually map to the health and safety management standards. But if the demands are really, really high, and what we're talking about here, if you've got an entire team where everybody's got a high workload, then the work-related, for that to be work-related bullying, it would have to be that an organisational level. So a kind of institutional level of bullying where they are putting too high a demand on their staff and probably leading them to burnout. When you're looking in a team, has one person got a greater level of work than others? Is more being asked of one person than the others? Or even have they had their work taken away from them, because that could be just as damaging? How much control do they have over their workload, planning their work, the hours they work, all of those kind of aspects? What sort of support is in place? Have they been given the training that they need to do that role? Have they been given the equipment that they need to do that role? What are the relationships like? Are they able to talk to their line manager? What's the team support like? What are the relationships like in there? Are they really clear about their role? Have they been given all the information that they need, or opportunities to talk about it and talk about any problems that they're having? And also, if there's a huge amount of change going on in the organisation, then that can also be create issues in terms of communication. And again, it leads back to people feeling unsure and safe. Is their role going to go? And therefore, they might try and push themselves forward and push other people out the way. And we've already picked up a little bit about cyberbullying and remote working behaviours. But I think, you know, one of the key things that we need to think about with cyberbullying is when people are in the workplace, there is an element of being able to leave. They will take it home in their head, but there is a physical boundary between work and home. And now people are working at home. If they feel bullied, then there is no boundary there. Essentially, that person is invading their home space, their safe space. And so for some people, remote working has been an opportunity to get away physically from the bully. For other people, it's become more intense by having to meet with them online and not having those boundaries. So it's very different experiences. for different people. So what is it like to discover that you're being bullied? Well, I've been through this myself, and so I talk not only from an exploratory point of view in terms of having researched all the literature and the case studies, but also from having been through this myself. But the quotes that are on here are from some incredibly brave people who shared their stories with me once I started going into this work, and allowed me to share their words as part of the training. And I think this first one really struck a chord with me. It was insidious, manipulative and undermining, very psychological. Left me feeling very unsafe and unsure about myself. You doubt yourself and your own sanity. It has a huge impact on you as an individual. And that feeling unsafe is really, really important in terms of the impact that it has on your own autonomic nervous system. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So what is the impact that it has? Just jumping onto chat again, what sort of things, how do you think it does impact individuals when they're going through this? What sort of way does it show up for them in terms of the way they behave, their health, things like that? What sort of things would you expect? Give you some hints. Yeah, not wanting to come into work. Yeah, brilliant, Olivia. Lack of sleep, yes. Anxiety, definitely. Stress, yeah. It's, if we look at those, we've picked up, probably covered a little bit from nearly every category here. So psychologically, anxiety, panic attacks, you get people who are, they end up, sitting in their car having a panic attack. They can't get out to go to go into the workplace. There's generally quite a lot of confusion and kind of why me? Yeah, absolutely. Questioning themselves, am I in the wrong? Is this all me? Am I making it up? And actually, when these can get really severe, it will lead to psychiatric injury, suicidal ideation. So it can be really, really severe. And it can take a long time to recover from. And some people never really recover at all. So it's really important to understand the psychological impact this can have. Physical signs, mentioned sleeplessness in there, and yeah, that's really, really common. And not just sleeplessness, but the fatigue that goes with it. So an example I had was, there was one lady who, it was something like a 10-minute walk to work, and she got so tired when she was going through it, she was literally getting a taxi because she couldn't even cope with a 10-minute walk to work. So lots of aches and pains, chest pain, back pain, all sorts of things like that, headaches, and quite often your digestive system will actually be attacked as well. So in terms of behaviours, yeah, you become more tearful, perhaps have angry outbursts. Yeah, you can absolutely react aggressively back yourself, and then you're judged as the aggressor. There's an acronym called DARVO. My apologies, because it just the name escapes me, of the lady who generated this acronym, but it stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. So if you speak up about something that's gone on for you, that person denies what has happened, attacks you back, and reverses the situation. So they make themselves to be the victim and for you to be the offender. So that's quite a common technique in turning it back on the person who tries to speak up. But certainly in terms of behaviour, coping mechanisms tend to change as well. So we perhaps move from healthy coping mechanisms of exercise, talking to our friends, things like that, and we become more isolated. We're more likely to perhaps drink or take smoke or take drugs, whether those are prescription or non-prescription will vary according to the person. But yeah, absolutely. And essentially you end up being a different person. And when I went through it, I definitely felt like I was I'd lost myself, is the best way I could describe it. I was a version of myself that I really did not like. And then of course you get the financial impact, because the chances are you will end up taking time off work and possibly even losing your job if you speak up. And if you are too ill to work, then that can be damaging for a long time. So huge impact that can take place. Just, stress got mentioned quite a lot there. And what we're basically seeing is that people who are bullied are quite often very good at their jobs. So they may be in a little bit of stress is great for really making us work well, keeping us energized and focused. But once we are pushed over that, we start to descend into distress. And that is where the fatigue, the exhaustion, the ill health kicks in. And it is that level of distress that stays with us. And actually, what it does is it puts us into our threat response. This image is designed to show fight or flight. So basically, what tends to happen is we are not able to self-regulate. We're not able to make positive meaning of what's going on. And that's when we're starting to move into a trauma response. But actually, in a stressful or threatening situation at any point in time, then we're likely to go into fight mode or flight mode. We either want to stand up and fight, or we want to run away. And you might recognize one of those in yourself and just pop it into chat if you do. We might also get to a stage where we freeze. We just don't feel able to take any action at all. And so we freeze. Or we could just, we give up, we give in, we capitulate, because that's easier than actually trying to deal with what's happening. When we are in that repeated pattern of being bullied, then we do not come out of that threat response. We stay in it. And that is where our health gets damaged. And that can lead to a real sense of hypervigilance and hypersensitivity. And so that then tends to exacerbate the situation. For those people who do end up in trauma, this lady is Evelyn Field. She is an internationally renowned psychologist in the field of workplace bullying and has worked with clients for 20-25 years. Basically, she says that people exposed to workplace bullying trauma present differently. They ruminate, so they're constantly thinking, but what they want to do is talk about it constantly. They want justice, they want validation, and actually when they're pulling those people in around them, then it's exhausting for everybody around them as well. So if you find yourself in this position, what should you be doing? I'm just going to go through these quite quickly. We do have a blog on the website, the 8 tips if you are experiencing workplace bullying. But what's really important is that you look after your health first and foremost. And in terms of deciding what you're going to do, for some people, the right decision is to leave the workplace that they're in and go to a healthier place. For other people, they want to fight and actually make changes. They want that justice. If you are going to go through formal processes, you need to understand what is involved, do your research, keep records, but those records need to be really factual. What happened, when, who was there, any witnesses. If you want to be really emotive, have a separate journal for that. That's what I would recommend. People will be full of advice for you, but choose the route that is right for you. And also accept that people might have a fear of being seen to support you. That's the really important thing. So people might be initially quite supportive, but there's a difference between being quietly supportive and actually standing up and speaking in your behalf when they may feel that that would put their own job at risk, and they need to keep a roof over their heads, food on the table. One of the key things is, and it is really hard for people who are in the middle of it, and that is to let go of the need for justice, because we have a number of processes at the moment that are not really fit for purpose and really just do not help. But we'll pick that up again as we go along. Just a little bit more on cyberbullying. First of all, don't feed the trolls. Do not respond in any way, shape or form. Block, report them to the organisation, and if it's a work issue, and also the social media platform, and also police if necessary. You know, there is a lot of legislation around and more coming about online harms, but actually there is already legislation in place, and most police forces will have a cybersecurity specialist that you can report to. And also be really aware of what you are sharing. Do not actually share too much of yourself online, and think about your own personal cybersecurity as well as the business cybersecurity. But also save evidence of the online bullying. So although cyberbullying is different in the sense that it can easily go out to a much wider group of people, and it can travel incredibly quickly, and other people can get involved who don't even know that person. What you can do is you can get the evidence by doing a screenshot, so that if it is taken down, you've still got it. So that's all the tough news about how bad it can be. But actually, we want to have a look at what employers can do to help prevent it. Now, employers do have a legal duty to provide a safe workplace and system of work, a suitable working environment, and maintain a relationship of mutual trust and confidence, of dignity at work. And so it's really, really important that that is continued, even if you are home working or anything like that at the moment. It's about, you know, the environment is not just about physical, it's about psychological as well. What you'll find is that most organisations will have an awful lot of these kind of policies and statements, values, things like that. And they might even have some training related to this area. But those are things that kind of sit on a shelf quite often, and they're not necessarily proactive. And as a result, a quarter of employees with challenging issues like bullying and harassment are swept under the carpet in their organisation. So those are the top three that came out. So that undermining people, so humiliating them, shouting at them in front of other people, taking credit for other people's work, things like that can be really, really damaging. So why isn't this working? Well, right now, the way that it works in a workplace is if somebody is bullied, then it's up to the individual who feels bullied to raise an issue. And the grievance and disciplinary policies that most organisations use are not really set up for these kind of relational conflicts. And because so many people are seen as losing their job or anything like that if they speak up and say they've been bullied, the perception is if I speak up, I'm going to be punished. So we don't have a psychologically safe environment to talk about this. Also, just looking at this statement here, if you permit it, you promote it. If you are a bystander, if you are not speaking up on behalf of somebody else, then effectively you are promoting it, you're condoning it through your silence. And that, again, is something that's a really important point for organisations to think about. So what is it about the current approach? Well, the current approach, basically, if there is some sort of poor behaviour and somebody speaks up about that, what they do is immediately they get pushed towards the top of this triangle. If you go to HR, for example, and say, oh, you know, I think I might be getting bullied, then they'll say, well, here's the anti-bullying policy, and if you want to make a complaint, this is how you do it. So what we're doing is we're being pushed towards the red zone, the failure zone. And the reason we call it the failure zone is that is where most ill health is likely to occur, the most damage is done to individuals and organisations, and the greatest costs are incurred. And yet, if we really focused our efforts towards the bottom of that triangle, by really recognising and understanding different sorts of poor behaviour and being able to have conversations about it early on in the process and setting the expectations, then we would actually be in a much stronger position. And there's less risk to both individuals and organisations by pushing that focus back down. Just to give you an idea of the cost of conflict to workplaces, the total cost per year, £28.5 billion. That is a figure from some research that was done in 2021. That's more than £1,000 for every employee across the UK. That's a huge amount of money. Imagine what good we could do with all of that money. So what's that cost made up of? Well, all sorts of things. It's as people get bullied, then they're more likely to be absent from work, or presenteeism, so they're there but they're not actually functioning at their full capability, and so you're not getting what you need from them. Productivity is reduced, got higher staff turnover, and all of that impacts to a lower organisational performance. You've then got things like the costs of providing employee assistance, counselling, occupational health costs, things like that. And there's probably an employee assistance helpline within an organisation anyway, but it will probably go up in terms of if it is used for things like this. It doesn't always get used. The damage that does, we talked about Glassdoor and everything, reputation earlier on, real loss of public goodwill and reputational damage. And the amount of time spent on, particularly once you get into formal procedures, is huge. And that's before you even start thinking about any financial penalties, compensation and litigation. So it's not a pretty picture, not a pretty picture at all. And most of all, what's really important in terms of an organisation and its employees is that breakdown of trust. And for organisations to bring that trust back for the employees that are still there, because whatever happens in a bullying case, people around it will be affected just as much as the people right at the heart of it. But also the people who have been bullied will really lose their trust, and it takes a long time to rebuild that. So definitely time for change. So what can we do differently? Well, we need to look at it differently. What we're looking at here is conduct. It's about behaviours. But it's not just about individuals, it's also about the way an organisation or activity is managed or directed. So we've got individuals and the way they behave, but also the way in which the organisation behaves. And it's this conduct that drives the culture of the organisation. So it's really important that we actually put some time and effort into looking at the behaviours. So we personally use a model called the 3Rs model of dynamic conduct change. Dynamic is really important in there. This is not an initiative. This is not a one-off, write a policy, put it on the shelf. This is about working in such a way that actually we're constantly evolving, reviewing, looking at behaviours, and making sure that we are putting new interventions in place to help keep us moving forward. So what sort of things can help us recognise poor behaviours and prevent them from escalating into bullying? Do you want to jump on the chat and tell me again, what sort of things do you think can help prevent workplace bullying? And I'll start you off with kind of what we do, and what the first thing we would do is we would have a look at how to recognise it in the workplace. So what are the expectations? What behaviours are you actually looking for? So instead of saying these are all the bad behaviours, we would say, well, these are the good behaviours, these are expectations. And a lot of that is about, really good communication as well. So educating people about what workplace bullying is, making sure they understand, because it is getting really widely used as a word, and yet we have to make sure we're using it in the right context. So education is really important. That clarification about what is acceptable and what's not. Yep, definitely, Mark, thank you. And also, your policies and procedures is going to go in here, but actually let's look at how we can train managers as well, what emotional intelligence skills they need to be able to really help dissolve conflict before it occurs, and help people have better conversations, increasing that psychological safety in the workplace so that people understand that they can speak up without fear of retribution, without fear of being humiliated, without being shot down for sharing an idea or trying something different, because actually that's what allows them to really grow and innovate and be creative, and that helps the organisation. So that's what we want. Again, yeah, absolutely. If you've got policies and procedures and documents, people don't tend to read them until they've got a problem. And actually what we want to do is say it needs to be embedded all the way through. So have a look at your recruitment processes, have a look at your supervision, your appraisal. How are you recognising and measuring behaviour within those? So how is the board recognising behaviour? What is the behavioural risk management approach across the organisation? And most of the work that needs doing is in this recognise section here. Then we can look at how we resolve and how we recover from any complaints that do go through. And just to reiterate, the most powerful intervention is prevention. We're talking about any intervention is, it can be anything from your internal communication messages, your email footer, to the policies, to the training. All of those are different interventions. And we just have to remember that the most powerful intervention is prevention. We need to put time and effort into that. But sometimes things do start to escalate. They go, there are issues. And what do we do at that stage? Well, we put people first. Early intervention is crucial. And we're supporting both parties. Now, if this is about behaviour, that's what we need to look at. We need to be looking at conduct, not performance. Now, imagine if you are that person being bullied and you've spoken up and said you feel bullied, and the impact that has had on you psychologically, physically, all of those different aspects that we talked about earlier. Of course, your performance will have gone down. But you cannot just go on to put somebody onto a performance review without looking at the bigger picture. And a lot of people who are bullied have been doing incredibly well in their jobs. And if you look back at their past history, then you should see a pattern which probably says they've had, had really good reviews, and all of a sudden it's gone off. And that's completely different to somebody who is not performing very well, who suddenly kicks back and goes, oh, you're bullying me because you're telling me how to do my job. If you are giving people guidance in how to do their job, or explaining to them that they haven't actually performed at the level, that is not bullying. If you're shouting at them to do that on a regular basis, that is. But the really important thing here is people before process. Absolutely go to coaching, go to mediation if it's really early and appropriate, not further down the line because it would do more damage, but absolutely get a facilitated conversation if you don't feel able to have that conversation face to face. But being able to have those conversations really early on is critical. And also, as a line manager, looking out for those signs that perhaps conflict is starting to occur. What we don't want to do is remove challenge from the workplace, because actually being able to challenge each other, challenge ideas, really fly with that is so, so important. And that's how organisations grow. So we want to be able to challenge, but we want to be able to do that in a safe way and not at a personal level. So staying on topic. The absolute last resort is to go to those formal procedures to resolve conflict. That is where the damage is done. We really want to avoid those. But actually, if it has gone to that level, the stage that is quite often missed out within organisations is actually allowing those people to recover. So it may well be that the person who feels bullied has left the organisation, or it may be that the person who's been accused of being a bully has left the organisation. However, there will be other people around them that will have been affected, that vicarious trauma that can actually infiltrate into other people around them. And we need to rebuild their trust, their resilience, their confidence in themselves after being party to this, but also trust in the organisation. And at an organisational level, they need to look at what they can learn from this experience and actually where they have not kept up with their risk management of behaviours, looking at key behavioural indicators. And so it is actually from both sides they need to look at recovery. So, in summary, let's talk about it. Let's not be afraid to use the word bullying, but let's understand how to use it by providing training and education about bullying and harassment. Improve understanding of the behaviours you want to prevent. More than that, improve understanding of the behaviours you want to see. Leaders need to lead by example, create those psychologically safe environments, speak up yourself, ask questions, show your humility. All of that helps because so much of our learning is through observation. Provide learning and development in emotional intelligence, particularly your managers, your leaders, and that ability to manage their own emotional, regulate their own emotions and really be aware of what's going on for them as well as others is so important. Put people first. Don't keep that person who brings in, the highest fees or greatest sales in the organisation if they are damaging all the other people around them in the process, because what you gain from them, you're losing in productivity from everybody else. But if there is a need for change, go for a supportive approach. Don't automatically go to punitive measures. Go to a supportive action to help people change behaviours. Support both parties. It's not one-sided. There's never just one side to anything. But do be prepared to show yourself to hold people accountable if they don't change. Don't forget that really important step to support people after resolution and help people to move on. A couple of maybe more personal points, and that is, if something goes wrong, admit your mistakes. And a sincere apology goes a long way. Nearly everybody that I've spoken to has said, if they just said sorry, I could let it go. So thank you for listening today. We obviously have a great deal of work that we do in this area. If you do want any more information, please feel free to get in touch with us at Conduct Change. That's my mobile number there as well. I'm very happy to take calls. So thank you very much for listening. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Nicki. That was brilliant. I'll if anyone else wants to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourselves or put something in the chat. That'd be really, really useful. My question is kind of related to differences between generations, as I kind of mentioned. You're getting millennials coming into the workplace now, and then you're getting my dad's generation kind of still in the workplace and stuff, and there's a big gap in age and attitudes, and probably all those things existed. And what I see a lot of is my generation and probably my parents' generation, bullying was almost accepted in schools and workplaces and sporting environments and all those sort of stuff. It was probably, at my school, it was definitely described as character building. And then you kind of accepted in the workplace. And the other end of the spectrum is, and it's not necessarily a wrong thing, but millennials, sometimes called by the older generations snowflakes, and so on and so forth. They're just not. So a lot of the issues that I see are those kind of differing.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point, Mark. Thank you. And absolutely. So we get a lot of people going through who are sort of very much the command and control, or if it was good enough for me, then it's good enough for you, and stop whinging. Yeah, you kind of hear a lot of that. But what you're also hearing is actually, intergenerational differences are nothing new. But what we have got is we've got the world of social media now, where people are sharing much more about their experiences. And what people want when they go into a workplace now is they want more of an experience. They're not purely money driven. And I'm not saying that everybody in the workplace is, but a lot of it was just about, when we're meeting targets, all about the business doing well. And now actually what they're looking for is, well, what else can I get from this experience? How are you going to support my development? How are you going to support my training? How are you going to support my mental health in the workplace, instead of just leaving it all for me? Because actually that's a joint responsibility. And so I think it's very easy for us to go, well, snowflakes and all that kind of thing. But then all you have to do is look at the amount of mental health issues there are in the workplace and go, actually, this is a real problem. But I think there are those differences. But I think there's a need for the people who have, moved up through the ranks to acknowledge that difference and realise that they need to be a different kind of leader, a much more compassionate leader in this day and age. And certainly the pandemic has really brought that to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, the great leaders have always been able to engage with people, and like you said, command and control only works short term or whatever. The other question it raised was when you talked about kind of interpretation and so on and so forth. One person's bullying might be another person's banter or so on and so forth. So is a lot of it kind of knowing your audience and pitching things right?
Yeah, I think that's where it's really, really important. We talked about the clarification of the expectations. And it's really important that actually, when you are looking at what the expectations are in the workforce, you have employee voice in that. Because you're going to have very, very different tolerance level and expectations in, for example, a manufacturing environment compared to, the Bank of England. Two extremes there. And yet, the really, really important thing is, what impact does that behaviour have on other people? So if you take swearing, for example, and people might say, well, swearing is not professional, it has no place in the workplace. Swearing probably happens in nearly every workplace, but in some more than others. And actually, it's very much a case of agreeing within your own team, within your own organisation, whether that is acceptable and if it's acceptable internally and externally. And actually, it's also a case of people speaking up and saying that, I'm sorry, I don't find that acceptable to me. And then you have to accept that. And that's where inclusion comes in. And this is where it very much leads to we talk about diversity and inclusion. Diversity isn't just a tick box. Diversity is about diversity of thought, cognitive diversity as well. And that only happens, we only allow that to happen when we have really good inclusion. And inclusion, about being able to have these debates, about accepting people for who they are, about allowing them to belong, so that you can still be an individual and authentic within a group. But within that, those really clear expectations of this is what behaviour looks like, and constant review and measurement of those as well.
Okay.
It's a really hard one because there are different interpretations. Absolutely, they can be. But what you have to look at is what has been the impact on that individual. So just because you don't think you're bullying somebody, if they have received that behaviour in a different way and it has impacted on their health, then something has to change.
So I guess it links in with all other areas of business. You've got to kind of recruit people that are going to fit in with your culture and, you know, those sorts of things. And, you know, they've got to be aware of the expectations from the start. Like you said, if you're, you know, having worked in football where every other word is an F or a C, you know, if you're usually offended by that kind of stuff, then that's not the environment for you. But, you know, I've noticed people who came in who just adapted, very professional people, you know, who just started swearing because
because everybody else did. Yeah. And that brings up a really interesting point, because if you have behaviours that are entrenched into a workplace or a sector, then essentially what people will see when they come in is, oh, that's what everybody does, and I want to fit in. And the human need to belong is incredibly powerful. And so what they will do is they will try and fit in, and they'll see that the people who swear, the people who act that way, or, you know, whatever the behaviour is, get rewarded for that. They get on, they're part of the group, they fit in, they get promoted. And so they will adapt those behaviours. And that's how they become entrenched and passed down. And you talk about kind of recruiting people to fit with your culture. And absolutely, for anybody going for a job, they should be looking at what are the values of that organisation? How do they like to work? Is it going to work for me? Because if you've got a clash of values, then it's not going to be a great place for you at all. But we've also got to beware of only recruiting people who fit with us and not allowing ourselves that ability to change and explore and be different and be more innovative and creative by bringing those differences in. So, yeah, it's ever moving. There's always constantly things that we can do differently, and it's about exploring those and keeping looking. But yeah, absolutely being clear about behaviours, clear about values, knowing what you're walking into. Don't interview somebody and make them think it's a completely different organisation. Be honest with them so they can make a really good judgment about whether it's a good fit for them to go and work there as well.
And so am I right in saying that this is just part of what a modern workplace or employer or employee should be doing? It's just part of making yourself a really great place to work, so people want to be there, not because, you know, they're living some Victorian time where they've got to work in modern slavery.
Yeah, absolutely, it should be. And, you know, the way we phrase it is that we're helping people to create the compassionate and courageous workplaces of the future. You are going to have to be compassionate, but you're going to have the courage to act in a different way, to speak up in a different way, admit your mistakes, make apologies, ask questions, do things differently, try things, fail, learn from failure, enjoy it together. Absolutely, this is it's a new way that we need to be working, and you're right, it is the way that is needed for the modern workplace. And
correct me if I'm wrong or whatever, but can you still do this? And, you know, the employer's concern, I guess, is that it will start to impact profits, you know, people won't work as hard, all that kind of stuff. But, you know, I'm guessing from your nods that isn't the case, that people actually who are cared about tend to perform better today.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, we talked about the cost of the organisation and the fact that, you know, if people are struggling in the workplace, if they don't have that psychological safety, then it hits onto their productivity. That gets taken out onto the customers as well. You know, nobody has a great experience. If you are making it a great place to work, if you are allowing people to, and this isn't about mollycoddling people or anything like that, it's about creating organisations where people are willing to stand up and be counted, where they're willing to share new ideas, they're willing to ask questions because they know that that's going to be really well received. And that helps an organisation to grow. It helps it to be more competitive. It helps increase the profit. It's absolutely a win-win for employers. Why would you not want a happy workforce?
Mm.
So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. One of the training sessions I do on strategy, that's one of the fundamental key things that,
Yeah.
you know, to give customer service, you've got to have employees that want to actually be there and care about the company and the product and all those sort of things, because otherwise it consciously or subconsciously they then impact on the customers, who then tell their friends that they did or didn't have a bad experience.
Yeah, and that's the same with retaining talent in the organisation. You know, if people are saying it's not a great place to work, then they're not going to get the best people to work there anyway. So, yeah, it's really important in that sense as well.
Mm.
And I think the really sad thing about a lot of bullying cases is that most of the people who come out of them are going, but I really loved that job. All I wanted to do was be able to carry on doing my job. And yeah.
In your experience, is it usually a business-wide thing, or is it usually the experience of one line manager or one person who's...
It can vary. It can vary, absolutely. So you can have an amazing team sitting within quite a dysfunctional organisation because they've got a great manager. Usually it's usually about the leader or the manager. They set the tone. So, you know, what's going on in the team is a reflection of what's going on for them.
Yeah, because most people's experience of work is directly related to their line managers or people around them, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, but you can also have institutional bullying. So the France Telecom example that we talked about earlier, or where they're actually putting those working practices in that, you know, they're encouraging people to, for example, you know, ring people up out of hours, talk to them at any time of the day or night, demand answers at 6 o'clock in the morning. And they're putting that pressure on their people to do that and to turn things around so quickly. But actually they're then trying to say, but we really care about our employees and their mental health. And yeah, it's so there can be a combination of the two.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, like you said, I think it's just part of moving to a better, more modern workplace. So
it is,
unless anyone has got any other questions, we'll just we'll stop the recording and we'll put this out on the YouTube channel. Will you be able to send us the slides so that we can send them out to all the participants?
Yes, I can do that. Yes, no problem at all.
Yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch, your contact details on the video.
They're on the slides, yeah.
So yeah, so thanks again, Nicki. It was it's a really great subject, really important.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
And thank you to everybody who joined us today as well.
Thanks a lot.